Ever heard of a murder mystery that like totally gripped a nation, fueled a media frenzy and ultimately changed how we think about
Oh
justice?
yeah, a story with echoes that reach us even now, you know. Still raising questions about the power of the media and the right to fair trials, especially in our digital age.
Yeah, it's crazy. Buckle up because today we're diving deep into the Sam Sheppard
A
case.
classic case.
We're going to be using this fascinating law review article as our guide. It's called A Distant Mirror, the Sheppard Case from the Next Millennium by Judge James Robertson.
Oh, Robertson's work on this is really insightful.
So get ready to uncover the story behind this landmark case and what it reveals about judges, media, and justice.
It's a reflection really of how our values and systems, try to adapt and grapple with change over time. It's a really interesting lens.
Okay, so let's set the scene. 1954, Marilyn Sheppard is found murdered. Suspicion immediately falls on her husband, Dr. Sam Sheppard. Now imagine a world without the internet, no 24-hour news cycle. TV is like the hot new thing.
Yeah, the media landscape back then was just, well, slower. Less in your face than what we're used to now.
But the Sheppard case, this one just blew up. Headlines were screaming for Sheppard's arrest. The coroner's inquest was broadcast live, which was unheard of at the time. And the judge just seemed completely overwhelmed by all the media attention.
Right.
It's eerie how much it foreshadows what we see today with, the media scrutiny around certain cases.
Absolutely. It really highlights the media's potential to shape public opinion, maybe even influence the pursuit of justice itself.
And you know what? During the trial, it got even worse. Media coverage intensified, newspapers published their information, and there was very little control over what was happening in the courtroom.
Yeah, a stark contrast to the safeguards we have today, in theory at least, to try and ensure a fair trial.
Unfortunately for Dr. Sheppard, it wasn't enough. He was found guilty and sent to prison. But the story doesn't end there.
Right.
After years of appeals, the Supreme Court overturned the conviction. They cited the intensely prejudicial media environment as the reason.
This is what makes the case truly significant, legally speaking, of course. It forced the justice system to confront how media coverage could completely undermine, those fundamental principles of due process, the right to a fair trial.
It's a decision that continues to shape legal precedents to this day.
It serves as this really powerful cautionary tale, about the fragility of justice, especially when it's subjected to this kind of media attention.
And speaking of the complexities of justice, let's talk about the original trial judge, Judge Blythen. He was a staunch believer in absolute freedom of the press, like completely. It seems almost like he just didn't have the framework for handling the media circus that surrounded the case.
Yeah, but we need to consider the historical context here, right? It's 1954. Those landmark Supreme Court rulings on media influence and fair trial procedures, those hadn't happened yet.
I mean, I can't even imagine trying to navigate that kind of situation without the legal precedents and the resources that judges have today.
It was a completely different legal world back then. I mean, the Supreme Court, in its later decision, did offer some guidance on, how judges should handle these situations moving forward. Things like limiting press access, shielding witnesses, issuing gag orders.
Mm.
But even with all these tools, there's still that question. Do we actually have a clear standard for when media coverage becomes constitutionally prejudicial? I think that's still a very intensely debated topic.
You're right, and it's a good point. Look at the O.J. Simpson trial or the Oklahoma City bombing trials. Two massively high-profile cases, but very different approaches to managing the media. One was a complete media frenzy. The other was, tightly controlled. But both of them raised serious questions about the media's influence on justice.
It's really fascinating, right? The Sheppard case really kickstarted a debate that's still going on.
Yeah.
How do we balance that First Amendment guarantee of a free press with the Sixth Amendment guarantee of a fair trial?
It's a delicate balance to strike, even more so in the age of instant information and social media. The Sheppard case, it really highlights those challenges that judges face in trying to maintain that balance. And it even makes us question if that whole free press versus fair trial model, if that's even, still relevant. Like, do we need a completely new way of thinking about media and justice in the 21st century?
Some legal scholars, people like Judge Reinhardt, argue that maybe the traditional adversarial model, maybe it's just outdated. They suggest that judges should be more transparent, more open about their concerns and engage directly with the public. It can help build that understanding and trust in the judicial process, right?
So instead of being these detached robotic figures, judges would be acknowledged as, well, as humans wrestling with these really complex issues.
Exactly. Transparency, communication, that could be the key to maintaining the public's faith in the entire system.
And that leads us to another really captivating aspect of the Sheppard case. The concept of what Judge Robertson calls a hermetically sealed justice. Do you remember that story about Judge Blythen privately telling journalist Dorothy Kilgallen that Sheppard was guilty as hell?
Yeah, yeah. A seemingly harmless conversation that later became, well, a real flashpoint. All these accusations of bias.
Right.
It's a perfect illustration of how appearances, even if they're not the reality, can be just as crucial as actions when it comes to maintaining the public's trust in the judiciary.
Exactly. Judge Weinman, the one who granted Sheppard's habeas corpus petition, he cited that conversation as evidence of bias, even though there was no, hard proof that Judge Blythen's opinion actually affected the trial.
Right. It's about perception.
And it started this whole discussion about the appearance of impropriety standard, a concept that's even more relevant in today's legal world.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've seen it play out in a bunch of high-profile cases, like those Microsoft cases, for example, where judges were removed, not because they were proven to be biased, but because of what they said or did. Things that created that appearance of bias in the eyes of the public.
Makes you think, right?
It makes you wonder if this whole idea of hermetically sealed justice, if it's even achievable. I mean, can we really demand judges to be completely detached, neutral robots, never express an opinion or engage with the public? Is that even realistic? Or does that just, erode public trust even more by making judges seem unapproachable and out of touch with reality?
It raises an important point about the human element. Can we really expect judges, I mean, they are people too, with their own experiences and thoughts, can we expect them to be completely devoid of any opinion or inclination?
Right. And then there's the whole idea of seeking pure, certifiably ignorant juries, as Judge Robertson calls it. This notion that a jury should be completely shielded from any case information, before the trial, as if ignorance somehow equals impartiality.
It's this bizarre idea that a jury should be living in a vacuum. Completely detached from the world and all the information that shapes how we understand things. Is that even possible? Or even desirable in the age of instant news and the internet?
Yeah. Reminds me of Mark Twain's critique of jury selection. He humorously pointed out how absurd it is to disqualify intelligent, informed people simply because they've, heard about the case or maybe even formed an opinion based on what's publicly available.
He hit a point.
Yeah. It makes you think, are we excluding the very people who might be able to, bring valuable insights and critical thinking to the deliberations? It challenges our very definition of what a fair and impartial jury actually is. So are we aiming for total ignorance? Or do we want a jury that can, filter information, weigh evidence, and apply critical thinking skills to reach a just verdict? I don't know.
It's a really, really tough question.
Yeah.
And the Sheppard case, when you look at it through these questions, it really just highlights how complex and ever-evolving our justice system truly is.
And speaking of evolving, let's turn to another factor that has significantly impacted our pursuit of, what do they call it, reliable verdicts, the rise of DNA evidence.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
Initially, it was hailed as like a groundbreaking tool for exonerating the wrongly convicted. There's no doubt DNA evidence has completely revolutionized the justice system. But like any really powerful tool, there's potential for unintended consequences.
Yeah, it's like, with any kind of scientific advancement, right? It holds immense promise. But you also got to consider, think about the implications, the unintended consequences sometimes.
Absolutely. Judge Robertson makes this really interesting comparison to fingerprint evidence in his article. Remember, for years, fingerprints were considered almost foolproof evidence.
Oh, yeah, like the gold standard.
But now, with all the advancements in forensic science, the reliability of fingerprint evidence is being questioned more and more these days.
We see this happening in courtrooms all the time. I mean, even when there's other strong evidence, the very fact that fingerprint evidence is missing, sometimes that's leading to acquittals.
It's like that whole myth of fingerprint infallibility. It's almost set a new bar in a way, right? Juries are hesitant to convict without that seemingly undeniable piece of evidence.
Yeah, it's like they need that smoking gun, so to speak.
So could we see a similar trend with DNA evidence, you think? Could this tool that was initially a beacon of hope for justice, could it actually become a source of reasonable doubt for juries, especially now that they're so aware of its power?
It's a question worth considering, for sure. I mean, as DNA technology becomes more commonplace and we understand its limitations better, could we see a future where the lack of DNA evidence, even in cases where you have strong circumstantial evidence, could that become a major obstacle for prosecutors?
Yeah, it's almost paradoxical, isn't it? This very advancement that was supposed to make verdicts more reliable might actually be creating new challenges to achieving those reliable verdicts.
It's like a double-edged sword in a way.
And it all circles back to the heart of the Sam Sheppard case and its lasting impact, right? Are we chasing this idea of hermetically sealed justice that's just not attainable in a world where information is constantly flowing, technology is always evolving, and our very understanding of justice is changing all the time?
Trying to contain a river with a sieve. You know what I mean? Information's going to seep through, perceptions are going to be shaped, and the pursuit of justice, it's always going to be this evolving conversation. We have to adapt to the reality of the times.
I love that analogy, and the Sheppard case serves as this powerful reminder that the quest for justice isn't just about, like, finding the right answer, this absolute truth with total certainty. It's a process, a human process, full of complexities, ambiguities, and the possibility of making mistakes.
And that's what makes it so interesting, right? It's not just about uncovering the facts. It's about navigating those gray areas, those uncertainties, those limitations of our own knowledge and understanding, and how all that shapes how we view justice. It's really fascinating stuff when you think about it.
It is. And in a way, the Sheppard case, it's still evolving itself, isn't it? I mean, even after Dr. Sheppard died, his son, Sam Reese Sheppard, he kept fighting to clear his father's name, even uncovered new evidence pointing to another suspect.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And although he wasn't successful in court, the story really illustrates how, the pursuit of justice, especially in these really high-profile cases, it often goes way beyond the courtroom. It continues to capture public attention, scrutiny. It doesn't just end when the gavel comes down.
It speaks to the enduring power of these stories, how they tap into that fundamental human desire,
Yeah.
For truth and accountability. And I think they challenge us to confront the imperfections, those limitations that exist within our systems.
And as we move further into the 21st century, with all this information at our fingertips and these advancements in technology, the lessons from the Sheppard case just become even more relevant. It forces us to ask, how do we actually ensure fairness and due process in this era of instant news, social media trials, and this growing reliance on forensic science, which is also constantly changing?
Yeah, it's a question without easy answers, for sure. But I think the Sheppard case, it gives us a framework. It helps us understand the challenges and have a more thoughtful, nuanced conversation about what justice really means in this rapidly changing world.
It reminds us that justice isn't static. It's not this fixed thing. It's a process, and it's constantly being shaped by everything around it. And by looking at cases like Sheppard's, through that historical lens, it gives us valuable insights into how our systems have evolved over time, where those potential pitfalls might be, and what steps we can take to try and ensure a more just, equitable future for everyone. Because ultimately, justice, it's not just about individual cases, right? It's about upholding the principles of fairness and due process for everybody, no matter what.
It's a responsibility we all share, as citizens, as consumers of information, as participants in a system that constantly demands our attention, our vigilance, and our engagement.
So that's the Sam Sheppard case. It's a story about murder, media, and that enduring human quest for justice. A story that continues to resonate and challenge us, even all these decades later. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought, something to kind of ponder that comes from Robertson's article, but we didn't really talk about it directly. He mentions the impact of DNA evidence on achieving reliable verdicts. And while we touched on that a bit, I think there's another layer to this idea of reliability that's worth thinking about.
Yeah, what's that?
We often talk about reliable verdicts in the context of evidence, the procedures, the legal precedents. But what about the reliability of our own perceptions, our own understanding of what justice actually is? The Sheppard case, and really any legal case for that matter, they remind us that justice isn't simply about finding the right answer, like finding that one absolute truth. It's a human process, full of complexities, gray areas, and, always that chance that we could get it wrong.
It's fascinating, right? The quest for justice, it's not just about uncovering facts. It's about navigating those gray areas, those uncertainties, those limitations of our own knowledge and understanding. And Robertson, he really emphasizes that point in his article.
You're right. He uses the example of DNA evidence, right? which has revolutionized the justice system, no doubt at it. But what happens when juries become so reliant on DNA evidence that they, I don't know, maybe discount other types of evidence, like eyewitness testimony or circumstantial evidence? Are we are we setting ourselves up for a future where, like, the absence of DNA evidence, even in cases where there's other compelling evidence, leads to acquittals? Is that the direction we're headed in?
It's definitely something to consider. It's like the pendulum swinging too far in the other direction.
Yeah.
And it's not just limited to DNA. Think about the Sheppard case itself. Judge Blythen's comment about Sheppard's guilt, that whole media frenzy around the trial, those are all factors.
Right.
They all contributed to a verdict that was later deemed unreliable.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, what about our own biases when we're taking in information about a case? How do we separate fact from fiction, especially in today's world, right?
Yeah.
Where you have instant news and everybody's got a take on social media. It's a real challenge to sift through all of that noise.
It is. It's a huge challenge. And I think that's why the Sheppard case is still so relevant, so important to study, even today. It's not just about the legal system itself, right? It's about our own roles in shaping perceptions of justice.
It is.
It really makes you think.
It does. So as you reflect on the Sheppard case, all the layers we've uncovered today, think about this, okay? What makes a verdict, or even our own understanding of justice, truly reliable in a world where certainty is often elusive and our perceptions are constantly being shaped by new information, by evolving perspectives? It's not just about finding the right answer. It's about recognizing the complexities, embracing those gray areas, and really striving for a more just and equitable system for everybody, even when the path forward isn't clear. And that's your deep dive on the Sam Sheppard case, a story about murder, media, and the enduring quest for justice. We hope this deep dive into the source material leaves you with a lot to think about. It's interesting. We often talk about, like, reliable verdicts in the context of evidence and procedures, those legal precedents. But what about the reliability of our own perceptions, like how we see things, our own understanding of what justice actually is? The Sheppard case, any legal case really, it reminds us that justice, it isn't just about, like, checking boxes, finding that one right answer, that absolute truth. It's a human process. It's messy. It's full of complexities and ambiguities and that ever-present possibility of, getting it wrong.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like a math equation, right? There's not
Yeah.
always a clear-cut solution.
Yeah.
Robertson, he really hits on that in his article, emphasizing how the quest for justice, it's not just about uncovering those cold, hard facts. It's about grappling with those gray areas, the uncertainties, the limits of our own knowledge.
Yeah.
And how all of that shapes how we see justice, how we define it.
Exactly. He brings up DNA evidence, which has been this game changer for the justice system, right? No question about it. But what happens when, like, juries become so fixated on DNA evidence that they start to, I don't know, maybe downplay other types of evidence, eyewitness testimony, circumstantial evidence, things like that? Are we heading towards a future where the absence of DNA evidence, even when there's other strong evidence, like, automatically leads to acquittals?
It's a valid concern. It's almost like we're overcorrecting in a way. You know what I mean? Like that pendulum swinging too far in the other direction.
Yeah.
And it's not just about DNA, right? Think about Sheppard's case. Judge Blythen making that comment about Sheppard's guilt, the media frenzy, those were all factors that fed into a verdict that was later overturned, deemed unreliable.
It makes you think, doesn't it? What about our own biases as we're, like, absorbing information about a case? How do we separate fact from fiction? Especially now, right? With instant news and everyone's got an opinion on social media.
It's a minefield out there.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to navigate all that information to figure out what's real, what's not, that's a huge challenge. And I think that's why the Sheppard case continues to be so relevant, so important for us to study. It's not just about the legal system itself, it's also about us, right? Our own roles and how we perceive justice, how we talk about it.
It really is. So as you reflect on the Sheppard case and everything we've talked about, consider this. What makes a verdict, or even our own personal idea of justice, truly reliable? Especially in a world where we rarely have absolute certainty. Our perceptions are always being reshaped by new information, by evolving perspectives. It's not just about finding that one right answer. It's about recognizing that there are complexities, gray areas, and constantly striving for a more just system for everyone, even when the way forward, it isn't perfectly clear. And that's our deep dive on the Sam Sheppard case, a story about murder, media, and that enduring human quest for justice. We hope this deep dive leaves you with a lot to think about.